With Mike, Tuesday Talks with Mike.
Good morning, folks. If you're wondering what this dog is doing here, he's feeding me notes so I don't forget. Today I'd like to talk about tactics in movies, especially war movies. Every war movie is built around the tactics that the warring parties use to best the others. And if you pay attention to any movie, any war movie, you'll see that that's true. I just grabbed these random war movies from my collection, starting with Gladiator. And you've all seen Gladiator. It's a great movie. You recall the first time that Maximus appears in the Roman Colosseum as a slave and a gladiator, and they're about to get chewed up by men on horseback. He instructs the other gladiators to form a shell around him, and they all circle tightly with their backs to each other's and hold their shields up. This was a Roman invention, and it's called the turtle. And we're going to get into the turtle again. Maximus not only survives his first encounter, he ends up killing a bunch of the attacking Roman soldiers because he's a great tactician. How he came to be a gladiator is a long story, and you have to see the movie to do that. But it's important to note that this is a Ridley Scott movie, and Ridley Scott often sets his films in other eras historically. The new one that's out now is Napoleon, starring Joaquin Phoenix, and you can bet that I will see it sooner or later. But you got to admire Ridley Scott. His attention to verisimilitude and historical accuracy is excellent. This is the same guy that directed Alien. So it's hard to wrap your head around his body of work, how diverse it is, and it's pretty much universally high quality. Every one of his movies is worth seeing, even the failures, and there have been a couple of failures. This is another Ridley Scott movie, and it's one of my favorites. It's about the Crusades in Jerusalem and the battle of the Arab armies, notably Suleiman, to reconquer Jerusalem for Islam. When Orlando Bloom, who plays the protagonist, finally arrives in Jerusalem, he finds the city in disarray because they know Suleiman is going to attack, and they don't know when. But they do know a couple of things. One thing is that, like all warring armies at that time, they're going to rely on arrows until they can get close enough, and then they're going to use siege towers. Orlando Bloom takes charge of Jerusalem's defense, and the first thing he does is place his best archers on the parapets and have them shoot their arrows as far as they will go to the east. Once the arrows land, he sends out soldiers to mark those places with sticks that are very subtle and only visible to those who are looking for them, because they know not to waste their arrows before the army passes that line. And once they pass that line, they're in range. The second thing he does is he anticipates the siege towers, which are these tall towers, 4 or 5 stories high, often made of lumber, that are wheeled up to the wall so that the Muslim soldiers can run up the stairs and board the wall directly. Orlando Bloom prepares for this by creating a number of long lariats, chains hanging down on the inside of the wall from the parapets that are not visible to those who are coming. But when they wheel the siege towers up to the wall, he instructs his soldiers to loop the ends of the chains over the top of the siege towers and then pull in one direction or the other. 20 or 30 men pulling on those chains. They tip the siege towers over and they go crashing to the earth. It's a brilliant example of tactics specific to the era and the techniques that are being used. One of the greatest movies of all time. If you haven't seen it, I urge you to see it. There are so many quotable lines. Moses was a prophet and beloved of God. But what the first third of this is one of the most thrilling movies ever made. The whole movie is great, but what happens is that T.E. Lawrence, who is sent to Egypt as just an adjutant, but eventually ends up, through his brilliance and leadership, taking charge of the Arab armies because the Turks have invaded, and the Turks are ruling the Arabs with an iron hand. And the Turks' stronghold is in Aqaba, a city on the Red Sea. Aqaba is on the eastern side of the Red Sea, and the only way to approach it is by sea, because behind it is a desert called the Empty Quarter, which means for 100 miles there's no water. And no one has ever attempted to approach Aqaba from the east until Lawrence comes along. And then he has an epiphany. He says there's only one way to take Aqaba, and that's to cross the Empty Quarter and strike from behind. They'll never see it coming. And Anthony Quinn, who plays the Arab leader, says, in 27 days, the camels will begin to die. And when they die, we die. That's another great quotable line. But they don't die. The Arab armies successfully cross the Empty Quarter and invade Aqaba from the east and capture it for the Allies, which include Britain, of course, because Britain was a colonial power that ruled Egypt at the time. This is a great war movie starring Brad Pitt as a tank leader. And this has to do with tank warfare, which is seldom investigated in film because tanks are hard to get. But they got the tanks together here. And this is about concealing the tank and waiting in concealment until the enemy tanks come along. It's an exciting movie. I haven't seen it in a long time. I didn't take notes on it. I didn't have time to watch all these movies over again. But I recommend this, and I recommend it for its tank-specific tactics. And along that line, I also recommend All Quiet on the Western Front, which came out last year. It's, I think, the third version of that movie, which is one of the most depressing, dystopian looks at war that has ever occurred. And a lot of it has to do with tactics, because the First World War was fought in the trenches. And in the First World War, they introduced mustard gas and other poisonous gases, which is heavier than air and would just roll across the plain and fall into the trenches where the soldiers were and would kill them. There's also tank warfare there, and it goes into how the Germans, because it's told from the German point of view, how they dealt with tank warfare. And it has to do also with men getting crushed by tanks, which was unfortunately an inevitable side effect of these battles. Finally, this is about the legendary 208 AD battle that heralded the end of the Han Dynasty. This is John Woo's masterpiece. It's one of the greatest movies ever made, and it relies heavily on tactics. And the tactics are so beautifully presented, especially the tactics on horseback. And there's a scene in here where the Chinese general is instructing his mounted warriors how to behave in the upcoming attack, and how they're going to avoid being crushed in the initial rush and then break free to go after the enemy. It's beautifully filmed, possibly too beautiful. It's the antithesis of All Quiet on the Western Front, which takes you into the trenches and is as grim and gruesome as you can imagine. This is war as a grand spectacle. There's a lot of death in it. There's a lot of wild sword fighting, but it's also exquisitely filmed in bright colors that it never rubs your nose in it, like All Quiet on the Western Front. If you like war movies or even crime movies, it often comes down to tactics about how people are going to accomplish their goals using deception often. This is the kind of thing that can distinguish a comic book from others if you get into the tactics, because people find them fascinating. The trick is to stumble across a tactic that hasn't been shown in a comic book before and to use it. I'm working with a friend now who's writing a space opera about two battling armies in space. And the opportunities presented by zero gravity are infinite. So we stumbled across a new tactic that has never been used in aerial combat before, and that will be in the book. That's it for tactics, folks.
All right, very informative. Again, we appreciate your comments, and like, subscribe, ring the bell, and remember, keep the comments positive. I do monitor the comments every day, so
She'll hit you, folks. She'll hit you with your shoe.
Yeah, I am the Annie McPhee, so please keep everything positive and upbeat. All right, and we are back on track with Tuesdays. If there's any topics that you think you would like to hear about writing and comic book world novels, put it in the comment section, and we'll take a look and see if we can talk about that in the next video. Thanks so much. Bye-bye.